Hello, viewers. Welcome to yet another episode of It Depends podcast series. We are continuing our discussion of new upcoming data catalogs that are based on open source technologies. This is the second one of a two-part series. And today I have the honor of not talking to one, but for the first time, we've got two founders of Acryl Data. So this is super exciting. My name is Sanjeev Mohan. I am part of Sanjmo Advisory, and I would love to get the introductions directly from the horse's mouth. So Shirshanka, can we start with you?
Yeah, horse number one. Hi, everyone. Shirshanka, CEO of Acryl Data. Prior to this, I spent a decade at LinkedIn as the tech lead of the big data team. Founded Data Hub as part of that journey, and big fan of the great work that you've done in the past and what you're doing right now with the podcast. So really happy to be here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I'm unicorn number two. So I'm Swaroop, CTO of Acryl Data. Prior to this, I led the data platform team at Airbnb, pretty much building the foundation for data there. And I went on to do search also there. Really happy to be here and talk about our vision.
So where did the two of you meet?
I was actually at LinkedIn prior to that, and we built the distributed database that runs all of LinkedIn together. And prior to that, Yahoo as well.
I see. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So the first time I met Swaroop was at Yahoo, where I was joining to start the the ads infrastructure team that was building the real-time bidding platform for Yahoo Right Media back in the day. And we were a team of individuals that were handpicked and brought together to build that team. So a lot of fond memories. A lot of us continued on to actually go to LinkedIn and build out the data infrastructure projects there. And then Swaroop, of course, has been doing his own thing.
This is what I love the most, that I'm talking to people who've actually been in the midst of this massive explosion of data, both Yahoo, LinkedIn, actually, and Airbnb. So you have firsthand experienced the pains that come with the growth. So I'm just curious. I know this is not part of our talk track, but you said you were sort of responsible for the distributed database layer at LinkedIn. What is it called? Is it a well-known thing, or?
Unfortunately, we didn't open source it, but it's actually well known. It's called Espresso. There's a SIGMOD paper about it, and there's been blog posts about it. And it's a really well architected system. We just couldn't open source it. But there are other allied projects that came out of it, like Apache Helix. So we both are extremely proud of that.
Very nice. Yeah. So there was a product called Voldemort. That was different. That's the key value.
Yes. So Voldemort was kind of a sibling of Espresso to some extent. Voldemort was built. Actually, Voldemort started out as a read-only key value store, built from Hadoop and then shipped online, and then evolved over a couple of years to become more Dynamo-like with the supporting eventual consistency and things like that. Espresso actually was built as a realization that we really needed a source of truth database to run LinkedIn on, and Oracle was actually showing its age. We had gotten to the point of like vertically partitioning Oracle and things like that. It was really hard for us to continue to scale to the web traffic that we were about to get. And so that ended up being like, eventual consistency doesn't work for all sorts of scenarios. We really wanted a source of truth store. And so Espresso is really a document-oriented distributed database that's built on top of sharded MySQL with a change capture stream, automatic ETL, and all of that stuff.
Wow, very nice. So getting back to our topic of the day, metadata management. There is so much confusion out there as to what exactly is data governance. Is it data management? Is data ops different? Metadata management different? How do you see this space?
So I mean, we see it as just a set of outcomes that people are trying to achieve, right? And so if you look at data governance as a term, then it generally encapsulates a set of activities that you do as part of your data practices, just to ensure that data is well understood, well maintained, and used responsibly. And so these are generally aligned with like the control plane of data, of the meta plane, like things like ownership maintenance, tagging data sets, the fields with labels to help with understanding. That's data governance. And then when you come to data management, that's more on the data plane, like the life cycle of data as it's created, replicated, making sure that it's not retained for too long, as it's getting transformed for analysis. And data ops is much newer, actually. And it mostly is trying to follow kind of best practices from the software versioning Git world and applying that to data. So being able to apply operational principles from the microservice world. Things like, let's make sure everything is version control. Let's make sure anything that can be checked into Git can be. Let's have the ability to do canary deployments. Let's have the ability to roll back changes, ability to monitor changes, right? Apply all those principles. And it's actually funny, Swaroop and I joke about it a lot, right? We have lived that online life of, being online and looking at in like the graphs and CPU and memory and all of that all the time. And when both of us actually migrated to the data world, we were caught aback actually by how little of that was there. I remember arguing for promotion cases for some of the individuals I was mentoring. And when I looked at kind of the packets, right, of what they had produced, I was unable to explain why they were amazing engineers because it was just SQL. I was like, oh, where are the unit tests? Where are the, the tests that prove that this actually works? And that it's just that those principles were not there. So anyway, data ops is really about kind of taking those best practices from the services world and applying it, microservices world, and applying it to data. So anyways, long story short, these are outcomes and there'll be overlaps and people will confuse things.
Right.
But underneath it all, I think, is this foundation of metadata management.
Right.
So my take on this space is, these are use cases on top. And they'll always be given labels like data governance, data ops. Now we're talking about data mesh as a use case, really, of a set of practices. And these labels will be fuzzy. But really, there's a bottom-up principled way of enabling all these multiple use cases. And that is through what we consider like a next generation metadata platform, like Data Hub.
When that makes perfect sense. So when you started out building Data Hub, and Swaroop, you went next to Airbnb where you had built Data Portal. So in both these cases, there were already a profusion of data catalogs out there. So why build a new one? Why not use what's out there?
Well, in my case, I guess we were there before a lot of this stuff started. So, the journey to Acryl or Data Hub even started back in 2013, when I moved to the big data team and I looked around and, at that time there was no Slack, there were email lists, right? Mm-hmm. And so people were on Hadoop announce and most people were just asking for, hey, I've got this data set, but I don't know if I should be using it, or I found this data set and I'm about to use it. Is it the right one? And so that led me to realize that, data discovery is a huge problem, even in such a small team. I mean, that time, the data team at LinkedIn was not that big, 20 people or so for the Hadoop team, plus, the data warehouse team. And I was, as a tech lead, responsible for not just, in fact, metadata, there was no concept of like being responsible for metadata. I was responsible for just the big data platform. And what that meant was, hey, my job is to make sure I'm managing the 100 petabytes plus of data at rest well. I'm ingesting it from streaming systems and online data stores. And I built Goblin as part of that project. And then supporting kind of multi-cloud replication as we were moving from on-prem to Azure and things like that. In fact, I would say the first interaction with metadata was really around this enabling search and discovery. And then my second interaction with metadata happened when I was tapped to become the tech lead for the GDPR project at LinkedIn. And so what that ended up making me realize is that we really have to think about it, bottom up and kind of build active metadata management into every part of the data stack. And so that's what we ended up building, where, Data Hub became that central metadata substrate, which is constantly listening to changes that are happening in all parts of LinkedIn's data infrastructure, reacting to that change, and systems, just data management systems like Goblin are actually subscribing to those changes. They're actually built on top of that metadata platform and doing interesting things with that metadata, like deleting data based on GDPR signals, or moving data from hot tier to cold tier, or anonymizing PII data or things like that. So that's kind of been my journey of, in some sense, actually inventing a new way of doing metadata and building kind of it from the bottom up while being in the context of a central data platform team that's responsible for so many different stakeholders and use cases.
So
Swaroop had a similar journey, I think.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
I want to go to Swaroop, and then we'll drill down into what you mean by like a new way of doing things. But before we do that, just for the viewers, you mentioned Goblin.
Mm-hmm.
What is Goblin?
So Goblin is an Apache project. It was, again, built at LinkedIn and then open sourced. And it is essentially a large scale data management framework, primarily used for ingesting all of LinkedIn's kind of first party data as well as third party data onto the data lake and the data warehouse, and then managing its lifecycle after ingestion. So deletions, GDPR data compliance, even replication across clusters. We run a V, meaning LinkedIn runs a really large warehouse with multiple HDFS clusters and now including Azure as well. It's open source and used at a bunch of other companies as well, like PayPal and others.
I see. Great. So Swaroop, what's your story for data portal at Airbnb?
Yeah, so the metadata journey for me started with the data democracy problem, right? You always start there. When I got to Airbnb, it was a successful company, but the platform was not working. So first thing is to always start with how to make data useful. Trust and safety analysts, business analysts, data scientists. So we took a very top-down approach as opposed to Shirshanka's principled architecture approach. Like Airbnb's design-led philosophy focused on, okay, how are the humans interacting with data? What questions do they have? What things are important to highlight? What is noise? So there was a lot of time spent in getting to that thousands of weekly active users, in nailing these small delight things, which is the Airbnb ethos. Like Brian Chesky famously conducted reviews where he would obsess over pixels. So, the architecture actually wasn't that great. And Data Hub is amazing in terms of the architecture. I mean, don't get me wrong, it did what it was supposed to do. But when you think about use cases like active metadata and whatnot, then I went on to become the overall cloud cost efficiency lead for Airbnb when COVID happened and our revenues plummeted. And I was told you have to save, several millions of dollars in like 6 to 8 months. I tried to look around and find, okay, what is important data? How do I even know what I can spin down? And, who do I contact? Like all of these were metadata problems, and it was very hard to do that without the substrate. So we ended up crushing our goals, but it required a lot of human will and effort, like through spreadsheets and, amazing engineers did amazing things finally, but there's a huge gap here. And so that's really my journey. I went on to do search where, knowledge graphs showed up, where we were ingesting location data from Google and OpenStreetMaps, and we had to reconcile what is the true identity of a place and kind of construct higher level understanding from raw facts. So then again, I thought, like, why can't we do this for data? Say like this table A_T actually is about revenue. So how do you go from raw understanding to principled higher level? Anyway, that was my journey. And when I talked to Shirshanka, it was like he had clearly thought about the architecture a lot more, and we just converged.
So it was very interesting. Yeah, the kind of some similar journeys, but actually slightly different kind of ways of approaching it. Yeah. So across kind of the two companies, I think we've definitely gone through like this, repeatedly seeing what works and what doesn't in metadata management, governance, and data quality. I wouldn't say that Data Hub worked the first time. It actually, that's why it started in 2013. It took us many years and many iterations before we got it to the kind of high adoption that we got to. And the top-down view of some of these things can be very verticalized. And when execs come down on you saying, I want to just make this needle move, it can be very easy to kind of just try to move that one needle. And so we really want to bring some of these hard-fought learnings and battle scars from kind of doing this for data first companies to solve kind of these problems for the rest of the industry.
That is great. So in your current role, your current incarnation of what you do, are you merging the best of features from LinkedIn data hubs, architecture, Airbnb data portals, UI with the knowledge graph? Is that all coming together, or is that
that was literally what I told Swaroop. That's what we should do. Yes. And so yeah, we're bringing in kind of the delight from the Airbnb data portal experience, and continuing to build up kind of the architectural purity and advancements of Data Hub, and putting it both into the same project.
Very nice. So I want to keep drilling down into the product, but before we go into the product, a couple of questions I have on the market aspect. Is that okay if we just stay on? Okay, great.
Sure.
So the question I have is, what is a roadmap for the industry, the metadata management data catalog? Where do you see it going, trends in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I have a maybe slightly contrarian take on where all of this is going. I think instead of, the current flock of catalogs, which are all racing to become beautiful applications with a UI and lots of buttons to click and lots of stuff happening inside of it, my prediction is that the future of catalogs will actually become much more invisible and much more ubiquitous at the same time. So what I mean by that is, that this roadmap for data catalogs, governance, and data quality will kind of split up into a foundational metadata platform that is integrated into every single tool that is in our modern data stack, as well as obviously beautiful apps that are built on top of it. But it kind of changes the narrative for what is a data catalog. A data catalog is always thought of as an app, but I think what will happen to the data catalog is it will become one of many apps sitting on top of a common metadata platform. And the way we think this will happen for the industry is through a couple of changes in how metadata management is done. Firstly, we'll see a lot more trends towards shifting left. And what we mean by that is metadata creation, metadata enrichment, all of these activities will become much more developer first, much more kind of data ops style, where you're checking in schema annotations alongside the schema. When you're editing your DBT model, you're dropping in metadata right there about the context of the object, who's the owner, who are the related stakeholders, what's the team to notify when an outage happens. When you're authoring your Airflow DAGs, you're able to annotate the inlets and the outlets of the DAG right there, so that you can always, in context, provide additional metadata about the thing you're just doing. You might be in a Jupyter notebook and you can just drop in some additional fragments there. Great expectations, right? We are able to add capabilities for emitting data quality signals where changes are happening. And I think a lot of these kind of shift left techniques will start embedding themselves inside each of these individual tools in the modern data stack. And all of this metadata will kind of flow from each of these individual places into kind of a central level. But that's just, I guess, physical metadata. The other thing that we have seen, and actually, so one of the things Swaroop and I are like, interestingly, we started out building, and now we are kind of learning from governance is something we experienced firsthand by doing it live. None of us have actually been part of.
What do you mean by governance? Like example?
Meaning, when you talk to the classic governance teams, there's a certain way of doing governance that, the modern Silicon Valley companies never did. The, armies of people sitting and creating the logical schema and then connecting dots and saying, here is the ER model and here's the diagram and here's how things relate. We never did that. Things were too frenetic. We never had time to kind of someone to sit back and say, what is customer and what is revenue? So all of our work was always bottom up. But I think there's actually there's a genre of catalogs that are only business and only logical. And then there's a cohort of new catalogs that are coming up that are only physical or only technical. And I think what will happen in the future is I predict that we will actually see a bridging of the two worlds. And we'll see that the bottom-up stuff is good because you're not losing any sight of details. The top-down stuff was bad because you would have the best clean room view of your world, but the reality would be like crazy, right? Yeah. And here we are cataloging the crazy, but then we also have to raise the cognition level. So that's the second movement that I predict will happen, where the technical catalogs will kind of move up into the business domain. DBT has already shown that, physical concepts can be separate from logical concepts when it comes to the analytical warehouse. And we can extend that paradigm. And, as Swaroop was saying, knowledge graph techniques can be used to establishing true identities. There's so much noise. Is that the data set? Like this S3 folder name that I have, is that a data set? Or is this other S3 folder name that I have the data set? Or is that the partition of the data set, right? So there's a lot of identity resolution, entity resolution kind of techniques from knowledge graph that need to be applied on top of this physical graph to then create kind of the business objects or the business types and that knowledge semantics. So first movement is shift left. Second movement is kind of raising up the cognition level or kind of merging of the business and the physical metadata. And the third, of course, is kind of the emergence of really an active metadata platform, which really can enable true active metadata management, which means metadata has to be just like data has to be streaming all the time. Metadata is streaming all the time. So it has to be real time. Signals has to be coming in all the time. You have to be able to compute enrich signals in real time, feed it back into the platform. Things have to be able to react in seconds, not days or weeks. And that kind of stuff, I think, will really change the game in terms of what can be accomplished.
And Swaroop, do you have something to add? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, the act of bringing enriched metadata into other tools, will depend a lot on the projection of metadata they want. So the platform has to support that kind of capability. Like, hey, are you looking to consume data health indicators for your airflow circuit breaking? Let's do that. Hey, are you a dashboard and you want to understand the underlying governance attributes? So I think the point is the platform has to be powerful enough to provide different projections of enriched signals without completely reinventing the APIs and whatnot.
That's great. So based on what you're saying, I am predicting that we can be here for the next 6 hours because I have so many questions, but we are not. So we are not. So the first question I had, the thought that crossed my mind was, you gave the example of DBT, but DBT to me is unbundling of logical and physical. And then you're saying you're bringing it together, so you're bundling it. And you know that right now, the hottest topic is, are we bundling or unbundling or rebundling? How do you, I mean, what's happening?
Great question. I think of it more in terms of, innovation will happen. And I don't think you can stop it from happening. Even as we have the great orchestrator debate between, Airflow versus Dagster versus Prefect versus DBT, I guess, there's probably another orchestrator someone is building in a garage, right? And in a month, we'll hear about it and suddenly it'll start taking off and it has somehow got a slightly different spin on the topic. So I think the innovation cycle will continue to segment or coalesce things that were previously together or were previously together and done wrong, right? What I think is more likely to be constant is this change in lines between where does orchestration end and where does data quality begin and where does transformation end and where does scheduling begin and all of these things. Yeah. But what will not change is the concepts of what is a data set, what is a pipeline, what is a transformation, what is a query, what is a dashboard, what is a notebook. And so I think metadata as that glue layer has the ability to really future-proof our bets on whether bundling will win or whether unbundling will win. Yeah, I fundamentally don't care as long as the connectivity between the Lego blocks is metadata. And actually, we as an industry shouldn't care in some sense, as
100%.
long as there is consistency at that base layer.
Yes.
So the problem with separation is violation of the do not repeat yourself principle, right? So, a data set over here is also a data set, but oddly different.
Right.
And so you end up getting into this mental map problem of, in superset, I call this thing this, but then when I go to my DBT model, it's called something else. And so as a human, you get confused. And so that, I think, is the real power of metadata, is to make those things not a problem anymore.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. Sorry, digress. So getting back to data catalogs, a lot of times clients will say, we've tried data catalog X, and then we tried Y, and X became shelfware, Y was too complex, and so we don't have enough adoption. Is that something you experience? And if so, how do you get around it?
Yeah, so we have definitely heard from the industry that sometimes catalogs end up as ghost towns. But we both have seen LinkedIn and Airbnb get to thousands of weekly active users. So something must have worked there.
Right.
And I mean, we don't want to pretend that we have all the insights, but I think there are a few things worth thinking about. So consumer companies, they try to be present wherever the user is. They don't try to get them all the time into their apps, right? So provide value wherever they are. And, we can learn something from that. And catalogs also.
What is LinkedIn doing or Airbnb to increase adoption?
Yeah, so, so when we actually had the metrics platform that we built called Minerva, which is written about and whatnot, and actually it's inspired by LinkedIn's metrics platform. The connectivity from where the metrics platform was and where the data portal was very smooth. You could actually bring in a lot of context wherever you are, and you could actually get health indicators for these metrics no matter where you are. So those are some of the examples, but I think the key thing is to pursue a multi-pronged strategy instead of always expecting your users to come to the app. It needs to be in your Slack, it needs to be in your notebook, it needs to be in your dashboard, pipeline, DBT. We've talked about that, but beyond all that, the other thing that hurts adoption is what Shirshanka was mentioning earlier about deploying armies of humans to somehow curate and then release clean metadata, right? So this is a never-ending journey in the kind of fragmentation, diversity, and scale that we are dealing with right now. So, I think the problem was primarily with how they were architected in the past, kind of keeping up with high-quality metadata as action is actually happening is important. So that definitely hurts adoption. If people see stale stuff, they cannot rely on it for like active health indicators. So things like what we have discussed, shift left, enrich at source, compute enrichment based on real-time changes. So these types of things obviously turns it into a serious repository instead of an app where a lot of buttons have to be clicked by armies of humans. So there's a fundamental shift there.
So time to value is really important, and then you mentioned real time earlier. So you're not spending too much time just curating data because so much of data is just repeated or may not even be that useful,
Right.
Yeah. So one question I have is, you mentioned how the LinkedIn's architecture was fabulous and your front end. Now that you have your product, when you go to sell and you go to a prospect, who is your target audience profile or persona? Business, IT, what role, who's going to use Acryl data?
Yeah, so it always starts with the central data teams.
Okay.
They're called different things in different companies. They're sometimes called IT. There's a data platform team, but most of the time they are responsible for data strategy, and they're getting pressure from multiple stakeholders to solve use cases related to discovery, governance, data quality. Uh, so, and in terms of the personas they serve, it's again spread. Data engineers, data scientists, business users, and so on. So, but usually what happens with us is there's a data engineer or a central platform engineer who's gone and independently validated whether their use cases are met using the open source product. They run a hack day, they actually establish value, and then they come to us to really talk about, hey, is your product enterprise grade? Don't talk to me about use cases and waste my time. Let's just talk about how I can deploy it. So that's our preferred model. Obviously, since the data catalog is a central concern, it's not like, a small group of individuals can make the decision. The CEOs do get involved,
I see.
but enough vetting has happened by the time about potential value. So that's really the persona for us.
So just real quick, and Shirshanka, I'm sure you've got a lot to say as well. But in my mind, to get data catalog penetrated within the organization, you need to win the hearts and the minds of business analysts, because they're the ones whose their job depends upon accuracy and trust of that data and accessibility. Are those also your personas? How do you see the self-service analytics?
Shirshanka, can you take it? My voice is kind of...
Sure. Yeah, so what ends up happening, so very interesting question. We actually see, as Swaroop was saying, that there are multiple stakeholders that the central data platform team is on the hook to make happy, right? And typically there are burning problems in each of those areas. So maybe the business users have some problems, maybe the governance team has some problems, maybe the privacy engineering team has some problems, maybe data science has some problems. And what ends up happening is that the central data platform team will pick the most burning problem out of those burning problems. Yeah. Then they will inventory the list of platforms that exist that can solve these problems, and then decide to choose the one that will be the most future-proof for them, because it's not only about for them solving this one burning problem, but also about being aware of the 5 other on-sim kind of burning problems that are about to light up, right? So often when the data platform team comes in, they will be bringing someone along with them. Right. And in some cases, it is a privacy engineering team who has to get GDPR done. In some cases, it is a governance team who wants to get ownership in good shape. And in some cases, it's a pure business analyst team who wants to get high quality documentation and all of that done. So we actually don't see a one only kind of use case for why the data platform teams brings us in, but it's actually multiple. But in terms of like, what are we doing to make sure that the business user is happy with Data Hub as a project or as a catalog, we are actually starting to shift kind of those capabilities up into the logical layer. So we have support for business glossaries. We are starting to get deployed in a lot of data mesh companies because we have support for domains and people are able to define data products. We have an extensible metadata model. And so all of these things actually help the business user a lot, because now they no longer have to kind of reverse engineer what the customer data is, because the data producers are actually organizing the data as customer data to begin with. So there's a lot of upfront work that they can save by betting on a technology like us. So that's kind of some of the things we've done.
So Shirshanka, staying with you, when people look at Data Hub or Acryl data, what are the unique features that you bring to the market compared to other catalogs?
Sure. I mean, I think the most high order bit is that we are really reimagining what a modern data catalog looks like. I say it in the most humble way possible, really. We are, the number one open source metadata project. We are deployed at scale at companies like Optum, Saxo Bank, LinkedIn, obviously, Klarna, and many, many more. And developers love us because it's a system built by developers for developers. Like we are all ex-data platform team people. And so we know exactly kind of what are the problems that people face. And not only we know everything, the community is helping us a ton. The community, when we started was, in the last year has 10x in size. So we're now at like 2.6K plus, I think, and we're growing, 10x year over year. So this community, and there are a lot of problems that are unsolved. Like, how do you improve ownership? Like we're actually using, the community is actually helping shape a lot of like what modern data discovery and governance looks like. So we not only have channels where people are dropping in stack traces where, Data Hub failed, but also cases where people are saying, hey, I did this for ownership and I'm doing this kind of annotation system for my protobuf schemas. What do you think? And so there's kind of a taste making that is happening in this community, which I think is unique because not every company has the ability to kind of reach such a wide group of people who are actually doing data and then curate practices live. So those are kind of from at the top half of like Data Hub as a project, why the community and the project is doing exceptionally well. But then in terms of obviously the core competence, the core IP, why the project is amazing, it's because of all of these things that I just talked about. Like we support shift left capabilities out of the box. You can push metadata from wherever you are, from your CI/CD systems, from your streaming applications, from any place really that you can think of. And we've been surprised by places that people are emitting metadata from that we even didn't imagine. So that's the kind of the first piece of it.
And what's the architecture for that? Like, how are you, what components are you using to ingest data, metadata in real time? Using Push?
Yeah, so, Data Hub is built with kind of a dual head on top, REST-based as well as Kafka. So depending on which format you prefer or which transport you prefer, you can send metadata to Data Hub in through any API. You can either stream it out using Kafka or you can send it over HTTP using REST. That actually gets stored in kind of a polyglot storage environment. So we support relational storage, we support key value storage for kind of the primary store of metadata. We also publish a change event over Kafka, which anyone can subscribe to. So it could be external subscribers, but we internally also subscribe to it and keep indexes populated. So which includes a search index, a graph index, and we also now have a OLAP time series index. So what that means is, metadata is a very complicated data set because you want to query it many different ways. You want to, given a data set, I want its schema, very simple key value lookup. Or you might say, I want to watch this data set for changes to its schema. So I want to subscribe to any changes to its schema. Anytime it happens, I want to know within a millisecond. So that's a stream style subscription. Or you might want to do a search query against the entire corpus saying, show me all data sets that have this. Or you might do a graph query where you're actually going across multiple entities and saying, show me all the people who have authored a data flow that relates to sales data. That's like graph query. And then you want to do time series questions like classic analytics, like how many pipeline runs failed in the last day that had this problem, that had this situation, right? So those kind of questions. So we are basically at the lower level architected completely as a distributed polyglot data storage system. A lot of actually our experience in building Espresso and all of that has been brought to bear in kind of designing how this system builds. It's federated, it's loosely coupled. You can drop in and out different storage engines. There's a big financial company that's running us on Cassandra in a multi-cloud active model and things like that. So that's kind of the technical underpinnings, and it really allows us to scale out easily and allow integrations of all forms of just low volume metadata as well as high volume metadata.
So as an example, so let's say I have an ERP, some relational database based application and things like, so let's sticking to the Kafka real-time push of metadata. So the schema changes or new data that comes in. So is it like a change data capture over Debezium Kafka that'll write? Is that how you do it?
Well, that's how you could do it. So we support both options. So we support like a crawl-based option as well, where you will just connect up to because for a lot of people, when they're doing a quick hack day or a quick POC, and to get started, they often want to just connect to the upstream system and bring in all the metadata.
I see. So there's a crawler.
With a crawler approach. So we support both. We support both crawling as well as augmenting using push-based approaches. So you can definitely connect up to a classic CDC pipeline. We see a lot of active metadata producers from like Airflow. So an Airflow job runs and it drops in an event, or a Great Expectations quality run just finished and it drops in an event. People are hooking up their CI/CD system. So for example, when they push a schema to production, the CI/CD system, as it is deploying the schema to production, will drop in an event on the bus. So those kind of activities are kind of pretty popular in how people integrate in kind of a real-time way with data.
In some ways, metadata, which is powering the data catalog, is an orchestration engine now, right? Because you can orchestrate the next. Anyway, I'm digressing.
You can think of it that way, yeah, because you can think of it like a live stream of changes that are happening in your data ecosystem. And so the sky is really the limit in terms of what you can do with it. You could decide to fire off a next job to go clean up some data, or you could decide to do something else. So you could think of it as control plane orchestration, if you will, even. But coming back to like, you started this by asking me, what are really the differentiating features, right? So on the technical side, I think our big differentiators are the real-time streaming platform, our ability to bridge technical and business metadata through using the business glossary and data mesh kind of concepts. And then finally, having an extensible metadata model where you get the Data Hub core types, like data sets, jobs, pipelines, this, but then you can also extend it with your own concepts without having to, kind of contribute it all back to Data Hub or kind of.
Can you give a real life example?
So there are a lot of real life examples that we don't know about because people have extended the model in their own ways. So for example, there is a company that is extending the Data Hub metadata model to add the concept of replication configuration. Meaning attached to a data set is a specification that defines where all do I need to replicate this data set to. And then they act on that and use that basically as the metadata specifier for, okay, this data set needs to go over there. And so their ETL job kicks off and it does whatever it needs to do. That's something that you won't find in Data Hub, the open source product, or even in the Data Hub open source graph of metadata objects, but it's something that this team extended and did. There are other companies that are extending Data Hub to add the concept of data products. So Data Hub right now in the open source metadata model does not have a concept called a data product. But a lot of companies that are doing data mesh are kind of leaping ahead and defining their own definition of a data product and extending Data Hub's metadata model in their company to add that new entity type called a data product, and then they're producing it. And we just got a PR, an RFC for someone who was modeling a notebook internally in their company because Data Hub didn't have it. So they just went ahead and did all the work and they extended the model and they added notebooks to the metadata model. And now they're sending it back because they think, it's actually going to be generally useful. So we do see that ebb and flow where someone might build something internally, run with it for a while, and then say, what, this concept is general. It might make sense for the general public, and they push it back up. So how we like to think of it is when you as a decision maker are betting on Akryl's Data Hub, you're not just betting on what it looks like now or what it does today. You're actually betting on the right platform with the biggest community, which will grow with you to scale with every kind of metadata-driven use case that you can imagine today or tomorrow.
So Shirshanka, because this is all open source, and what I'm going to ask you is public knowledge anyone can get from GitHub. But since we are talking here on this show, who are today the biggest contributors to the open source project?
Well, obviously Acryl Data and LinkedIn continue to be the drivers for the project, and a lot of code commits come from us. But in addition to that, we have companies like Adevinta.
Adevinta, yes.
We have a lot of companies.
Let me help you there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peloton, Peloton, Optum,
Peloton.
Zynga,
Okay.
Saxo Bank.
Zendesk. There's a lot of companies out there contributing to open source.
That is very exciting. So, and it'd be great if we can hear about the business use, like the business usage. Like, is there a case study, one or two case studies you can share?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think depending on where you start, whether you're mid-market or enterprise, mid-market generally they start with productivity. So we have an e-commerce company that wanted to help their marketing analysts and others monetize the data better, like how to do Facebook ads better, and wanted to navigate the maze, understand. So that's one case study where they've deployed. And there's another German company where they needed to categorize their external data acquisition carefully so that it's used responsibly. So they've across many different domains that they have. So that's another example. So large enterprises tend to push a lot more on the active metadata use cases. How do I connect everything up, starting from my APIs, operational stores? So they're usually very, very demanding on architecture, and the case studies there involve both governance as well as data quality. So in one particular case, they have kind of defined constraints that they want on the compliance attributes, and they have monitoring enabled on that to see what they need to do. So
now we are coming to the close. So I want to change tracks completely, and I want to ask you some personal questions, if you don't mind. All right.
Please.
So you both are, dyed in the wool engineers, and now you're running a company. How is that transition for you? How do you grow your company, offices, people? So hard to find people. So what is it? What's this personal transformation engine for you, and how do you handle growth?
Well, I can go first. Yeah. For me, it has definitely been quite a big change from being kind of a, IC architect responsible dotted line for a bunch of engineers doing good work to actually being like the face of the company and being required to actually understand how payroll works and how to pay taxes and all of that stuff. So there's been a ton of growth personally in terms of being much more disciplined about how I spend my time and not getting too lost in the tech, and making sure that I keep enough time to learn. Swaroop is actually an amazing collaborator in that regard. He has always had a keen eye for business, so I lean on him a lot for a lot of that stuff. In terms of where I spend most of my time is like just focusing on providing overall direction for the open source project and the community. They really look up to me a lot for kind of making decisions, and that's a heavy burden, but it's a very good one. Community-led development, is our superpower. And so we have like a inclusive community. We have to make sure we are hearing everyone well before committing to a path forward. And they're like these amazing practitioners, as Swaroop was saying, from Optum, Peloton, Saxo Bank, etc., Zendesk. I spend a lot of time distilling what I'm hearing, and then taking my vision into concrete milestones that we can deliver back to both our open source community as well as our SaaS customers. And I spend a lot of time really talking to amazing product and infrastructure folks to convince them to join us. And a lot of them are thankfully in our community, and a lot of them are part of my personal network from my past lives.
Excellent. And Swaroop, how about you?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time on the front lines with customer success, reducing time to value. So, I basically found that it's good to be authentic. Even I'm an engineer, I can't suddenly acquire a sales personality. So people actually appreciate that. And I also ask a lot of questions about what are your problems, then resisting my engineer instinct to say you should use this tool. So there's been a lot of growth in that area, essentially.
So sticking to you, Swaroop, last question. What advice do you like? Any advice you would want to share with our viewers? Like some organizations, places or books that you've read, and finally tell us something that the world doesn't know about you.
Yeah, first thing in terms of quote unquote advice, I would say data can feel like a grind, but I have seen throughout my journey that it is the most impactful thing that you could be doing in a company. So it's important to remind yourself about that, because often we get harassed by lots of stakeholders, but there's a lot of value that each individual working in data is delivering. And in terms of books, classic leadership books, but I'm really enjoying Frank Slutman's new book. There is so much wisdom packed into that. I need to read it at least 10 times.
Oh, wow. And so, the name of the book is?
Amp It Up.
Amp It Up.
So it's really about leadership and how to build companies. It's an amazing book. And in terms of what we both do, I am a South Indian music musician, like still in training. Shirshanka also sings, and we both given concerts in the past. So
together, like you have a band?
We used to, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The band didn't work out, so we ended up forming a company. but
the bills.
but we have performed together, and we did not have rotten tomatoes thrown at us. So I think, in fact, there were a few people dancing.
I would love to attend. Let me know if you still do that. So
sure.
So Shirshanka, same questions to you.
Well, I think a lot of it would be repeating what Swaroop said. So I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give people is to always look beyond kind of the shiny UX of something. No disrespect, UX is 100 times important, but if you buy a shiny product and you haven't made sure that it's going to scale with you for everything you need it to be, then you can get really disappointed. And I think to some extent, some of the disappointment in tools that has emerged over, like, the data stack is always full of tools, and everyone is trying new tools and throwing them out 1 week later and 1 year later. Oh, that didn't work. A lot of it is because the industry is pushed towards building that MVP that just meets that one use case and doesn't really scale to the next and the next and the next. And so I really encourage buyers to look beyond that, first screen or that first demo. So that's, I think, in terms of advice. And in terms of books and conferences, I think, the conference space has exploded a ton. I used to be pretty into reading papers from VLDB and Sigmod. I think those still continue to be like the marquee places to read good old, literature. And you should keep a ear to the ground when it comes to that. Data conferences, there's quite a few that I like. I'm speaking at Data Council next week. I think it's a pretty nice conference that has emerged. There's Data Day in Texas that's going to come up as well. And there's like so many that we're not even keeping track. Kafka Summit tends to be a great place to hear about all things streaming. And I'm really excited about the new GraphQL conferences that are coming up, I think.
And we've done our own too, called Metadata Day a couple of times. So stay tuned for that.
That's right. Metadata Day has been a huge success last couple of years. And I think looking forward to what happens next there.
This has been absolutely amazing. I cannot thank you enough for coming to this show and educating us on all things metadata and data catalog. Thank you so much for your time. And any parting words? Anything you'd like to say? We good?
This was a great chat, Sanjeev, and thanks for keeping us on time. I know we can ramble a lot when it comes to this subject, but hopefully it's going to be.
I'm so interested in all the Harry Potter based things you did at LinkedIn, so, thank you so much. Take care. Have a nice day. Thanks for joining us. It was a pleasure. You stayed to the end. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Sanjeev.
Same here. Thanks a lot. Bye.